Welcome to the video, guys. As most of you will know, the last week has shown, along with probably a good few weeks before that, the unmitigated disaster that is the European Union when dealing with coronavirus. Because as I've covered many times, the Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, French and a fair few others are pretty pissed off with the European Union and 4 of the northern states, including the Netherlands and Germany, which in the last couple of days it seems has come to a head. At first there was reports that they had agreed their £500 billion bailout. That has now turned out to be false, as no agreement was made because they cannot agree on the repayment of the bonds. The countries who make up the single currency and all wanted to be in a currency union with each other don't want to be lumbered with paying each other's debts through a collective bond scheme known as the Corona bonds, which I've covered a couple of times. And while personally I do agree with the stance that you shouldn't have to pay other people's debts, I feel obliged to say that if you join a currency union, then surely you take on the financial responsibilities of the whole currency union. You made your bed, you lie in its situation. Now, there's a few articles over the last couple of days covering this topic, and we're going to start with The Guardian, which actually has an opinion piece that might be based in some fact, which I'm sure will be a massive shock to all of you. It reads, "The coronavirus crisis has exposed the truth about the EU. It's not a real union." Because it's not. A real union is that of the United Kingdom. 4 countries that will work together for the good of each other because we have actual history as a real union. The arguing over a financial rescue package for hard-hit states shows that even member states don't trust Europe. While in our political union here, guess what's happened? No need to argue about bailouts and things like that. The government deals out the bailouts for the entire country. The European Union has scraped through its latest crisis by the skin of its teeth. The past week has been a disgrace. When ministerial talks collapsed on Thursday over the plans for a corona bond, which I pointed out a minute ago, the reaction seemed terminal. Germans and Dutch insulted Italians and Spaniards. Italy's Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte said his country faced an economic and social emergency, and the EU appeared not to care. The Danes spoke of a financial crisis on steroids. The European Commission's Vice President Frans Timmermans predicted the EU as we know it will not survive this. So they're even predicting it themselves that the EU as it's known will not survive this situation. Which is again pointed out here in the start of this article, saying the EU's new coronavirus relief deal is a gift to Europe's enemies. Which I suppose is partly correct, though the European Union is a gift to its enemies in more ways than just the coronavirus relief. Take a look at their multi-year annual budget that they have been failing to agree because of course we left and they can't make up the £65 billion shortfall. Even though obviously Brexit was voted for 4 years ago, you think they would have made some changes to be ready for that shortfall. Oh yeah, I forgot. They anticipated that our rotten parliament would have kept us in the European Union by essentially ignoring the referendum result of 2016, which we would have seen had the election gone a different way in December. Says here, ignore the headlines about $500 billion to rescue Europe, refusing to share debt across the Eurozone threatens the Union's future. Because by failing to agree on how the debt is going to be paid, and obviously sharing it amongst the member states, which, while I don't agree with personally, if you join a currency union like I said, is something that should just be a given. And in my mind, should really teach you not to join a currency union. Because you're then putting any of their burdens on top of your shoulder, obviously. Anything happens to that currency, it directly affects you. And a good thing that we kept the British pound, I'm sure you would all agree. Now obviously, in the southern states, who I do really feel sorry for in this situation, they are getting extremely angry, including the Italian Prime Minister, who apparently loses it with the EU promising to halt virus rescue deal until new measures are agreed. Italy's Prime Minister has lashed out angrily in response to a package of measures agreed by EU's 27 finance ministers, aimed at mitigating the impact of the coronavirus pandemic, describing the proposed solution as totally inadequate. Mr. Conte also warned he would refuse to sign off on the deal at the European Council until there were what he described as adequate measures on the table, likely a reference to so-called coronavirus bonds, which would make all members of the EU 27 jointly responsible for debts racked up in public spending. The 55-year-old reacted angrily after Northern European nations, particularly the Netherlands, voiced their steadfast opposition to the idea of Euro bonds, nicknamed, like we've said, Corona bonds, which have been pushed by Italy as a solution. He added, "At the European Council, I will not sign anything until I have a set of measures that are adequate to tackle the challenges we face." The visibly irritated Premier also took aim at what he called the falsehood and lies of the opposition led by the right-wing leader Matteo Salvini, which, he said, hurt us because they weaken our hand in the negotiations with the EU. Your hand is already weakened in negotiations with the EU because, like us before we left the European Union, you have sold your soul to them. So your hand is already weak. Making available cheap loans from the Eurozone bailout fund as agreed by the finance ministers was a totally inadequate tool, and Italy had no intention of applying for the help from the fund, known as the European Stability Mechanism. With this article here going further than the Express one. It's on Breitbart.com. It says Italian PM warns European Union could collapse over coronavirus. The Italian Prime Minister floated the idea of all Europe doing things on their own due to the European Union's poor response to Italy's tragic experience with the Chinese coronavirus. "We do not expect Germany and Holland to pay our debts, but the fiscal policy rules must be loosened, otherwise we will have to write off Europe and everyone will do things on their own," said the Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte in a recent interview with the German newspaper Bild on Euro bonds, according to a report by La Repubblica. Recent polling reveals that overall confidence in European institutions has collapsed. Trust in the EU has fallen from 42% last September to 27% now. Trust in the EU Commission has dropped from 41% to 24%, and trust in the European Central Bank from 43% to 25%, showing there that the European Commission, EU institutions and the EU Bank itself are now the Labour Party of Europe, where absolutely no one trusts their complete incompetence, and I would say rightly so. In a recent interview with the BBC, Conte told reporters that European leaders are facing an appointment with history they cannot miss. "If we do not seize the opportunity to put new life into the European project, the risk of failure is real," said the Italian Prime Minister of the EU. Conte also compared Italy's experience with the virus to coping with the situation in the dark. And obviously, it's not just Italy's Prime Minister and Italian ministers that are saying this. We also have the Portuguese saying a similar thing, or maybe even more. Could the EU kick out the Dutch? Stunning threat in Brussels' backlash against the Netherlands. A growing row inside the European Union has led one member state leader to question whether the Netherlands are truly committed to the Brussels-led project, hinting that the Dutch should be left out of EU deals. Portugal's Prime Minister Antonio Costa has stunned fellow EU leaders after raising the idea of leaving the Netherlands out of EU agreements. The astonishing remark implies that the Netherlands could be kicked out of the European Union amid growing outrage at the country's conduct in the latest coronavirus response talks. The Netherlands held up talks after blocking demands from Italy, Spain and France for so-called corona bonds, where the EU would issue joint debt, as we already know, which is likely relating to this story here. Dutch blocked rescue package over fears it was not too big to fail. The Netherlands' rejection of corona bonds stemmed from a concern that it, unlike the EU, was not too big to fail, a political analyst has suggested. The day after the EU thrashed out a €500 billion package of measures aimed at mitigating the economic fallout of the global pandemic. Alex Pigman, a Brussels-based journalist working for AFP, highlighted the deep divisions and bickering which erupted between key players in the EU 27 in recent days. In a series of tweets in which he dissected the strategies of several member states, the Netherlands, he suggested, were vehemently opposed to the concept of the Eurozone, the monetary union of 19 EU countries which have adopted the euro as their currency, issuing euro bonds, a system whereby debt would be issued collectively across the bloc rather than to individual member states. Critics, most notably Dutch Finance Minister, believe the end result would be rampant, uncontrolled spending in southern European countries hardest hit by the coronavirus, the cost of which northern countries would be required to share. Which I think most of you would agree is a fair argument to have, but like I said earlier, you shouldn't have joined the fucking euro then, should ya? You reap what you sow. You wanted to join a monetary union. This appears to be one of the cons of doing that, obviously. Because at the end of the day, I think the Netherlands are realising that they're not as big as some of the other players, so don't want to be lumbered with everyone else's debt, which I guess I can understand, as should most people. We certainly wouldn't want to be, that is for sure, which is a good thing we have left the EU now, because there are reports here before I end this video that suggest how British taxpayers were forced to contribute to save the euro before. Britain was forced to contribute to save the euro in 2011, a year after former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Alistair Darling, had no choice but to cave into demands that the UK paid $13 billion towards the bailout fee, unearthed reports reveal. Brexit needs to make sure that that cannot happen again. We do not want to be paying a single cent to the European Union to bail out any of their bullshit. That is for sure. Now before I go, I've started doing live streams and uploading gaming content on my second channel. If you would like to come and join me for a live stream to chat in real time, have an interest in gaming related content on YouTube, or just want to follow me over there because you are a legend, the link will be down in the video description below and as a pinned comment. I hope to see you all there. Now as always, before I go, I want to thank our PayPal, Patreon, Subscribestar and YouTube members for supporting the channel, along with everyone who watches my videos. Remember to let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Leave a like, subscribe with the notification bell and share this video as it helps the channel a lot. And I will see you all in the next one.
There is a pattern consistent throughout history of oppressed people turning on the oppressors. Slaves against their owners, the peasantry against the feudal barons, colonies, Mr. Verhofstadt, against their empires. And that is why Britain is leaving. And it doesn't matter which language you use, we are going and we are glad to be going. We're off.